Susie Stocken is just one of the hundreds of passengers waiting to board Pan Am Flight 001 to New York. 3,000 miles away in New York are Susie's cousins. Until last year, neither Susie nor her cousins knew of each other's existence. The date is the 18th of May, 1989, 50 years to the day when Susie and her twin sister Lottie first came to this country as 3-year-old refugees.
The LNER steamer Prague brought to Britain 200 Jewish children, refugees from Germany. They came from middle-class homes in Berlin, Leipzig, Breslau and Hamburg. The youngest among them were 5 years old, the eldest 17, and they are to be trained for useful service in Britain. Until suitable homes can be found for them, they are being cared for in the holiday camp at Dovercourt.
One thing I do remember about that journey was a dark train, a kind lady giving me a floppy toy. That memory sticks out very vividly in my mind. This floppy toy, I think, was turquoise and white. And it must have been a lovely toy because I remember it.
The selection was a bit like a cattle market. Every Sunday people used to come down and view us. Some were viewed, other children had to send their photographs to different families. And that's what happened.
One of the great pressures, actually, on the Dovercourt camp, where most of the children arrived, was that the faster they could get rid of the children, the quicker other children could take their place.
Susie and Lottie were finally chosen by a Baptist minister and his wife in Cardiff, a decision which was to change the two little girls' lives dramatically.
We were 3 when we were there. I can't remember too much. I remember the fact that we obviously had our names changed from Lottie and Susie to Grace and Eunice. I remember the first school that we went to there. And then we used to go to a private school. We used to go on a bus, and it was quite a long way away. It was in Llandaff. And when we started going there, that was when Lottie became ill, because I remember she couldn't run for the bus.
Were you a happy child, do you think?
I'm sure I wasn't a happy child at all.
Did you know anything about your Jewish background, where you came from?
No, nothing at all.
Well, unfortunately, there weren't enough Jewish people who came forward. At the time, I suppose, things were difficult here in England as well. Times were hard, it was the 30s, and it must have been very chaotic. And anybody who came forward was considered by the Refugee Committee. I do think they have now slight feelings of guilt at what happened. They admit to it, but like they said, they did their utmost, they did their best, and it wasn't easy to place little twins, so they must have just let them go a little bit too easily, I would have said.
So foster parents were not always very well vetted?
I think they were vetted as well as possible. And then I think they were vetted for mostly their willingness and the fact that they may have a home and something like that. I don't think that they went into the psychological searches that were necessary of why does a family, you know, what are they fulfilling by taking on a child or children. And there were many instances where, again with hindsight, it was then discovered that they were fulfilling their own needs and that their lives, in fact, were very incomplete. And they thought somehow that they would have the happy family by acquiring some children. Also, there was, a lot went on where people try to convert Jewish children. They really saw it as a mission. And they saw it as a mission of converting children to somehow their way of thinking.
So the twins, now called Grace and Eunice, grew up as two ordinary children with no idea of their true identity or faith.
I think we were about 7. We had an idea that we didn't actually belong to Mummy and Daddy, as they called themselves. And we were told then, I think, that we came to this orphanage in Munich, but nothing else was ever said.
They actually told you at that time that you were Jewish?
No, they didn't tell us that we were Jewish at all. No.
What did they tell you?
Just that we came from Germany before the war, from an orphanage. and it was burnt to the ground, and all the records had been burnt to the ground. So I guess don't ask any more questions. And so there were no more questions ever asked.
Susie, or rather Grace as she now was, went to school in North Wales, where she gained the nickname Leggings and the friendship of Jean Simmons. Now Jean Watson, she remembers Grace as a normal, high-spirited girl.
She was very full of life, but almost kind of frantically full of life. She seemed to be in trouble the whole time. I used to puzzle about this as to why she seemed to bring a lot of punishment on herself and a lot of attention. She seemed as though at one level she was looking for attention, but when she got it, it seemed as if she was totally crestfallen by what was meted out. So I remember sort of being a bit puzzled by this as to why she kind of drew attention to herself like this. But she was popular and liked and had a great sense of fun, great sense of humour.
Was she always like that, or was there any occasion when you remember she was a bit different?
Well, I think the first sort of hint I had that there was a different Leggings, as it were, was I found her very upset one night in the corridor, crying. And it's a bit hazy now, but I have discovered since that what that was all about was that she had found her name on a list, and she was under her natural name, as it were, Beckhofer, and not the name that she'd sort of grown up with.
Well, we were doing our O-levels, and we all had to sit in alphabetical order, and my name began with L. At that point in time, I was Grace with a surname beginning with L, and suddenly I was asked to sit with the Bs. So I asked why I should be sitting with the Bs, and they said, well, this was a legal document, and as my name was Susie Beckhofer, would I mind writing Susie Beckhofer on my examination paper?
How did the school know what your real name was?
Well, I suppose they must have known when we actually registered, because the names Grace and Eunice were just names that were given to us, as you can just take on any name, but they weren't legal names. I suppose if you actually go to school, then you have to have a legal name.
But that day when you realised your name was Susie Beckhofer was a complete shock to you.
Yes, it was a big shock, yes. I really didn't know what to do. I was completely paralysed. As far as writing any exam, that was totally out of the question.
After leaving school, Grace began what was to be a long career in nursing.
I got involved in nursing when I was 19. I'd had a couple of clerical jobs after I left school. And I knew I really wanted to do something. I wasn't terribly well qualified when I left school, but I felt I had it in me to do something. So I wrote off to various hospitals, and the first one that accepted me was Old Church Hospital in Romford.
Were you supported in this decision by your adoptive parents?
Not really. I think they would have preferred me to have stayed at home and looked after Lottie. But I felt I wanted to get away from home. I was a normal young person. I wanted to live my own life. So I started nursing at 19 at Old Church Hospital. I enjoyed doing my training very much. In fact, I did quite well. After my training, I was a staff nurse on the casualty department, and I guess that's where I got my first casualty experience from.
At what point did Alan come along?
Alan came along when I was in Birmingham. By this time I'd done my midwifery, and I was doing a course, I think, at the Accident Hospital. And we met at a party, had a very long courtship. In fact, I thought he'd never ask me. But it worked out that he did, and we got married in 1966.
How much of Susie's story did you know when you married her, Alan?
Hardly anything at all. There was just the faintest suggestion she may have had some Jewish origins.
So has the fact that she's Jewish been a complete surprise to you?
No, certainly not. Not a complete surprise, no.
Grace had resumed her nursing career after the birth of their son Frederick, and then in 1984 a friend suggested she write to the German consulate in London to try and trace her birth certificate.
I guess this was about February, and the beginning of August, I'd almost forgotten about it. We'd been away on holiday, and you know how there's always a mound of post when you come back? Amongst this post was one birth certificate. Now this for me was wonderful because, I think I've got it here. On this birth certificate it's got my mother's name. I've never seen my mother's name before, and it's Rosa. So my mother's actually got a name. And my father's got a name as well. His name is Otto Holt. That's just amazing.
It was in August 1987 that Grace heard about a broadcast to be made by Bertha Leverton.
In the August, I remember it well, it was a lovely sunny day, and I had heard an announcement that Bertha Leverton was to be on Woman's Hour, talking about a children's reunion for the children that could come over on transport from various countries before the war.
Like yourself?
Like myself and Lottie, yes. So I thought it was very important that I listened to this particular programme. I somehow felt that maybe there was a key here that would unlock a door, a very important door.
And that turned out to be the case.
Absolutely. This was the key to my story.